whatever they want in their territory. But the problem arose when this new power in Ukraine clearly made it absolutely clear that they won't tolerate this Russian factor in Ukraine. They said that there would be another vision of history, and those people in East Ukraine and in Russia and in Kiev, in Kiev as well, in Crimea, those who they worshipped as heroes, as liberators, according to the new version of history, they were traitors. And those whom we considered always to be traitors, and those who are proven to collaborate with Nazis and implicated in mass killings of Jews, Poles, Russians, they are the heroes. Okay, it's up to some part of Ukrainian society to believe in this or not to believe, but they wanted to impose this situation on the whole of Ukraine. And, of course, the status of Russian language. Again, there was a very clear, about 60% Russian-speaking majority in the east of Ukraine. The situation throughout the rest of the country is different. It can be 40%, can be 30%. In Crimea it was 70%. But the moment people received these signals that there will be no more Russian welcome in Ukraine, and that there will be no more heroes and no possibilities to celebrate the Victory Day, for example, and to give tribute to those who have fallen liberating this country, these people started to mobilize. They said we don't want this power. Listen to us. Let's meet. Let's have some talk, and let's decide how we move forward. If you want to have your own vision of history and we want to remain in the same country, okay, let's make a federal Ukraine. One part of this country will be speaking Russian altogether with Ukrainian and having this version of history, and you can believe in whatever gods you want. It's your business. But the powers the leaders in Kiev, they didn't want it, and then this power operation started. So all of a sudden, instead of organizing dialogue with these people in Donbass, there was an attack on Donetsk and on Lugansk. So it was quite clear that these people, they don't want dialogue. They want to oppress, and they want to solve this issue with military means. A lot of things happened in the meantime. I'm giving a very simplified picture about how we view it in Russia. There were terrible events in Odessa, for example, when 45 people were burnt alive in the house of trade unions, only because they were advocating closer relations to Russia and support of Russian language. We were always telling them that we see no danger in Russian factor in Ukraine. We want them to be Ukrainian citizens, same as other Ukrainian citizens, but they have their own rights. They have the right to speak Russian, and they had this right before Maidan. There was a law guaranteeing this right, but this law was scrapped immediately after the Maidan coup. And when the Ukrainian army started to penetrate Donbass, there was a very fierce resistance from local people. A lot of people came there from Russia, and we don't conceal this. A lot of volunteers came there, because for many people in my country, this was kind of battlefield for a bigger Russian world. There are very many Russian patriots in Russia, of course, and they saw it like this. So we couldn't prevent them going there. And the only thing that you will not find there in Donbass, and you couldn't find that even at that time, was regular Russian army. So there were a lot of people with military training, and there are still a lot of people of military training. But if you ask me about proportions, what were local population and those who volunteered from Russia, I would say maybe 10% from Russia, maybe even less. So these people fought for these ideals, these people died for these ideals, and they got a lot of weapons, a lot of ammunition from Ukrainian army, which started their assaults unprepared, claiming that they will have a very easy victory, which was not the case. So the Ukrainian army suffered several defeats, and there were a lot of warehouses with ammunition situated there. And that's how people got this ammunition and arms and everything else. Our Ukrainian colleagues spent a lot of time trying to prove that there is direct Russian aggression in Donbass, which is ridiculous. First of all, if you could imagine that at this time, when back in 2014, when all these events unfolded and when Ukrainian army was especially weak. You can imagine what could be a direct contact of Russian army with Ukrainian army. So we wouldn't have such much problem to advance further if we had such a task. But we didn't have such a task. And well, I can cite you a lot of examples proving otherwise, which would be criticized by Ukrainians. But recently, for example, we had a Security Council meeting about Ukraine. From time to time, we do have such meetings. And when Ukrainian representative, Mr. Yelchenko, was again citing a lot of examples of thousands of Russian tanks, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers, aviation, I don't know, everything. And we had online with us the head of special monitoring mission from Vienna, whose task is to monitor the situation in Donbass. We used this opportunity and we really asked him in front of everybody to, Mr. Apakan, could you tell us, can you confirm what Ukrainian ambassador just now said? Do you have any proofs that this is the case? And he felt very awkward, but he had to say, no, I don't have such proofs. We have not seen any regular Russian forces. We have seen people in Russian uniform, but we have seen people in German uniform, American uniform, because you can buy it in the market. We have seen people with Russian flags, but it doesn't prove anything. So no regular Russian forces. And this was, of course, a shame for Ukrainian delegation there. They claim that nothing happened, but for us, it's again the situation when they try to present the wrong picture of the events instead of dealing with the main problem. And the main problem is, if you want these people to be your citizens, you need to respect their rights and what they want. We always said that this is not a Russia-Ukraine problem. This is a problem of Ukraine, of central authorities with their own citizens. So you start a dialogue, you ask what they want, and you try to accommodate what they want. That's how we understand democracy. It's not with tanks and with shells. We signed Minsk agreements together with Ukraine, with Germany, with France as guarantors. And the core of this Minsk agreement is a direct dialogue between Kiev and the authorities of Donetsk and Lugansk. It's not happening even now. So this is the reason of all this situation. Ukraine doesn't want to acknowledge that this is internal conflict. It's much easier for Ukraine to say that this is a result of Russian aggression. And so that's what we have. That's what we had under Mr. Poroshenko. So if Mr. Poroshenko is re-elected, it's very difficult to expect any changes to this. What about Mr. Zelensky? It's difficult to judge. You're absolutely right. He was very cautious about this thing, but it's yet to understand whether it's because he wanted to appeal to Russian electorate during the elections, or he really wants to make a change. It's very easy to change this situation. It's very easy to solve this problem. You need, first of all, the desire in Kiev and, of course, the desire in Washington, because now it's absolutely clear that Washington holds a tight grip on Maidan authorities, and we clearly see this. So there should be also a desire in this country to let events evolve the way the Ukrainians want these events to evolve, without any interference and meddling and financing processes in Ukraine that are anti-Russian. I would be blunt about this, but this is the case. So it's very easy to solve this issue, and Ukrainian president, a new Ukrainian president, is very much welcome to do it, but he can't do it with Russia. He can do it with its own people. That's the only way to solve it. So Minsk agreements, direct dialogue with its citizens. If a new Ukrainian president, and hopefully not Mr. Poroshenko, does like this, then we have hope. If not, I don't know. Really, I don't know, because military solution is not a solution, but people there are desperate to fight for their ideals, and you can't force them within Ukraine if they don't want to. We never recognize them, you know, and we always say that the task of the Minsk agreements is eventually of them to return to Ukraine. That's our position, it doesn't change. At the same time, we of course can't ignore that they are Russian speaking, that they are suffering, that they have a lot of problems, so we try to help them, we bring them humanitarian aid, and we face all this criticism of international community and of Ukraine, ridiculous claim that we bring armaments and anything else. So I try to do it in a short way. Yeah. Okay.
Hi. I actually have quite a few questions about the Venezuelan-Russian relationship that's going on in South America right now. And the first question I'd like to ask is, how does Russia plan to play into Maduro's presidency currently at this time?
So it's for a start, yeah?
Yes.
If it's related to Venezuela, all of them to Venezuela, you can voice them and I will try to answer them one by one.
Let's do that.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
So
let's start then with Russia and Maduro.
Russia and Maduro.
Where does Maduro's support come from within the Russian government?
I think it's a wrong perception because Russia doesn't support Maduro. Russia supports Venezuela. Russia supports international law and legality in Venezuela. It's not about Maduro. We were always quite clear with the Americans that whatever Venezuelan people decide, that will be a good decision for us. If they decide that Maduro is their president, we will respect it. If they decide that he should go, we will respect it as well. We are for peace and prosperity of Venezuela as a very close country to us. But we just don't want to tolerate the situation when one country imposes whatever it wants on the other country. Because the way it was done in case of this Mr. Guaido is ridiculous. It's absolutely contrary to international law. First of all, you need to understand, again, a little bit back in history. Maduro may be not the ideal person to be president of Venezuela, but again, it's up to Venezuelans to decide. But he is the president. And before the second election that took place, if I'm not mistaken, in January last year, there was a very fierce campaign from the United States, first of all, and from Western countries against him personally. And a lot of leaders of opposition that were about to take part in these elections and were planning to take part, all of a sudden they didn't take part in this election. They boycotted the elections. And there are direct indications that they did it under either pressure or influence from Washington. So you have an elections, there are several candidates, opposition would not win, everybody was absolutely sure about it, and then the United States just said, guys, don't participate in these elections, he's a bad guy, we'll deal with him afterwards. So they don't participate in these elections, they boycott the elections. Nevertheless, Maduro gets re-elected. Well, in a democracy, as far as I understand, you are not obliged to participate in the elections. If you're a candidate, you can say, I'm not a candidate. And nobody will say that this election is not fair because somebody just decided not to present his candidature anymore. So there was 4 or 5, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not following this very close, but 4 or 5 guys who decided not to participate in the elections. And then, on the basis of this, Washington says, this is not legitimate election, because opposition didn't participate, and we can't forget that the opposition was actually encouraged not to participate by Washington, but this doesn't matter. And then all of a sudden, this guy, who is the leader of National Assembly, legally elected, of course, but he's not president, and there is a Venezuelan constitution whom everybody respects. All of a sudden, this guy comes to the street and say, I'm the president, hello, I'm president of Venezuela, now, from now on, because Mr. Maduro is not capable of being president, he usurped power and he's dictator, that's why I'm the president. I don't know, any one of you can go in the street right now and say, I'm the president of the United States, because I don't like the guy who is sitting in Washington. Will it change anything? I don't think it will change very much. But not in case of Venezuela, because in case of Venezuela, within 3 minutes he gets recognition, he gets a call from Mr. Pence, such a coincidence, I don't know. So he gets the call, he gets recognition, and then all these countries that are allied to Washington, one after another, says, yes, we recognize Mr. Maduro, we give Venezuelan authorities 8 days to reconsider and to seize power. And Maduro is our president, Guaido is our president, Maduro is nobody, and so on and so forth. This is ridiculous. This is not the way things are being done. We said, we are for the dialogue. Americans are saying, Mr. Abrams, who is Elliot Abrams, who is a special representative, who has very good experience in undercover work in Nicaragua and in Venezuela. He says, the only thing we can speak about is how Maduro will go. That's the only point of dialogue. We will not, the opposition will not hold any negotiations with Maduro because he is dictator and so on and so on and so forth. Okay, is it international law? There is an elected president, and there is a Venezuelan constitution which quite clearly indicates cases when president can be incapacitated. And proclaiming yourself a president in the middle of the mob is not one of these cases, actually. That's why Russia said, together with some other countries, that we don't recognize Mr. Maduro. He is maybe a good head of National Assembly, but he has nothing to do with the president of Venezuela. We are for the dialogue. We really want Venezuela to prosper. So let's join forces all together and help Maduro and Guaido, who is, by the way, not the most popular leader of the opposition. All of them sit together and work. Okay, but there is another side of this coin. It's a terrible humanitarian situation in Venezuela. All of a sudden, it became even more terrible. So people are suffering, people are dying. If you watch CNN or other channels, you will see that this is kind of, I don't know, DRC or something. Very, very bad situation in this country. Nobody mentions, of course, that a lot of money that belongs to Venezuela is literally stolen by United States and United Kingdom. Only recently, it's about $30 billion that were placed by Venezuela in the United States and United Kingdom in accordance with international agreements. And all of a sudden, these two countries say, we don't recognize you, this is not your money. This is money of Mr. Guaido, because he's the president. But $30 billion is not a small sum of money, and of course Venezuela could have bought a lot of things necessary for this. I don't know, drugs, medicaments, I don't know, whatever, to help its population. Of course it can't do it, and it can't buy anything because its accounts are suddenly blocked. There are no transactions possible anymore with Venezuela. But this is not regarded here as kind of pressure. This is regarded here as normal thing. And, all of a sudden there is a movement, let's bring humanitarian aid to Venezuela, because Venezuelan people need this. I don't know how many of you are dealing with humanitarian law in this room, but those who deal, you know that there is a basic resolution of General Assembly which stipulates the conditions of provision of humanitarian aid. One of the key provisions is agreement of the government of this country. So you can't forcefully feed a person if he doesn't want to eat, in this case. But in total ignorance of this, United States and the allies all of a sudden on 23rd of February decide to bring humanitarian aid through Venezuelan border. We don't know who are the humanitarian agents. We don't know what was there in the trucks that were at the border. And of course, the Venezuelan government said we don't want this aid. First of all, because we can cope with our situation ourselves. Secondly, because we didn't ask for this aid. It's not humanitarian aid, it's foreign intervention. There was this incident on the border when these trucks at the end were burnt by one of those who really was presented as humanitarian agents. And there was a scandal, but it led to nothing. So what do we have now? Now we have a situation in Venezuela which is far from normalizing, of course. There are big challenges in front of legitimate authorities of Venezuela, but it would be very unwise to picture the situation the way it is pictured here, to bear hopes that this kind of regime is doomed, that people do not support it. There are people who support and there are people who do not support. Both are numerous. So what we try to avoid in this situation, we want to avoid civil war, which is very close in Venezuela. We want to avoid, of course, foreign intervention, which is also very close. With all these all options on the table from politicians of this country, we can't exclude anything. So that's why we, together with some other countries, we stand very firmly on the basis that international law should be observed here, that there should be dialogue. We can be intermediaries in this process, but it all should be done in accordance with the constitution and with the laws of Venezuela. Do you like Maduro? Don't you like Maduro? It's a second question. It's up to Venezuelan people to answer this question. And we, as international community, should not impose our will on Venezuelan people, but should create conditions for them to pursue dialogue. And if during this dialogue a majority of Venezuelans decide that Maduro remains their president, it's up to them to decide.
Okay, well, then that also goes into the next question then about international law, because Russia has declined several sanctions that have already been in place by the American government about Russia's involvement with Maduro and Venezuela. And now with the Russian troops going into Venezuela, right, the question is whether or not you're going to represent the Trump administration sanctions that will be placed, that will be upcoming.
Well, it's very difficult to understand your question. First of all, I don't know of any sanctions that was imposed on Russia.
There haven't been yet, but
Haven't
there's lots
been.
of talk.
But I was supposed to recognize or not to recognize.
Well, the question is whether or not you can recognize, or what you know
It's
will
not.
the Russian government
I don't think it's
do,
the question of
and
us
there are.
recognizing or not recognizing sanctions. This is unilateral sanctions. They're imposed on us. It's not the first wave of sanctions. If I'm not mistaken, it's 67th wave of sanctions that are imposed on my country, so the United States, and it's not the question of us recognizing or not recognizing. About our troops, where do you take this information about these troops? There were three planes that landed
Three
in.
planes, if I'm not mistaken, 300 troops along with an ambassador representative that landed 2-3 weeks ago in Venezuela, which comes to my next question on whether
But
or
I
not.
haven't yet answered your previous question. No, don't rush. So, where do you take this information? What do you read or what do you smoke? I don't know. Because this is ridiculous. What can, even if you imagine that 300 Russian troops come there, what can they do?
Well, that's actually what my question was going to be.
Then
Whether or
ask
not
it
more
to
troops
mainstream
are going
media
to
that
be
spread these
arriving, and
rumors.
whether or not that they're going to be there to actually uphold Venezuelan law, or whether or not that they're going to help Maduro restructure the infrastructure of security going on in Venezuela.
I think you mix up 300 troops and 300 Spartans from the movie. It's not the case. We don't have such powerful troops, and it's not like in Hollywood movies. If you bring 300 troops there and dress them as Russian troops, there will be 300 troops in Venezuela. For the time being, these are military specialists and other specialists, because, as you might know, there are a lot of cyber attacks on Venezuela right now, and this country can't cope with these cyber attacks. So we want to help them to restore the electric grid, to restore their basic facilities. These are technical specialists, and we do it not because we want to send our troops or somebody else in Venezuela. We do it in strict accordance with our bilateral agreements that we have and that remain in force. That's why I don't really know what I'm speaking about the troops or a special ambassador. There is only one ambassador of Russia in Venezuela. I know him personally. He's a nice guy, and he hasn't reported about any troops coming. So, when you read mainstream media, you will come across very many scenarios like this. I would not be astonished if you come across some scenario that Maduro was evacuated, or that Vladimir Putin is instead of Maduro, I don't know. Whatever. But let's be serious people. I hope it's serious university, so we're not speaking about the articles in press, but about what's happening in real. And switch on your head when you have this information like this. Ask yourself a question: is it really so? Ask, and also look for different alternative sources of information. I do not advise you to watch only Russia Today. I advise you to watch different sources. Watch BBC, Russia Today, CNN, whatever. But get your information from different sources. Otherwise, you will believe in some ridiculous rumors that have nothing to do with reality, like this one.
So you're suggesting the troops did not land in Venezuela, and they were predominantly military specialists to help reinstate infrastructure and basic ways of life in Venezuela?
I think you answered your question yourself.
Okay, all right then. Well, then that's going into the next one. Right, how long does Russia plan to stay in Venezuela? Is there a predicted length of time in which they think that they can establish order?
Russia stays in Russia. We don't stay in Venezuela.
Okay, military specialists that are in Venezuela?
Those from that fiction story that you asked me.
Sure, why not?
So you ask those who asked this fiction, who composed this fiction, not me.
I'm not talking about the fiction. Let's call this a hypothetical situation then. If there were
Highly likely
military
situation.
specialists from Russia in Venezuela, what would be a projected outcome, right, in terms of length of time to establish order in Venezuela?
I think my English maybe is too poor, but I don't understand Either I don't understand your question or you don't understand my answer.
Okay.
It goes to both ways, because you are asking me to comment and to...
I get up in front of people, and then of course you get nervous because you're around a bunch of people and words fall
Don't
out.
see anyone nervous in this room, apart from you. Everybody is very relaxed. So if you don't mind, if you don't have any concrete and truly questions that I can answer, maybe somebody else would also pose them, if you don't mind, with all due
Go
respect.
ahead, continue.
Okay, thank you.
Dmitry, so my question, you talked about foreign aid coming into Venezuela and how you can't feed a person if they don't want to be fed. Can you compare that with the situation in eastern Ukraine and Russian aid coming into Ukraine? If the Russian government or the Ukrainian government doesn't want that Russian aid, what right does that have to cross the border and come into eastern Ukraine?
If the Ukrainian government doesn't want Russian aid, then it should take care of their own citizens, which it doesn't.
Can the same be said about Venezuela then and international aid?
Venezuela takes care of its citizens, and nobody steals Ukrainian money abroad when they lie in foreign banks on the accounts belonging to Ukrainian government, which is the case of Venezuela. Nobody is coming out in Kiev and saying, "I'm the president of Ukraine, so let's recognize me." This is the difference, you know. It's kind of we live in this post-truth world. There are a lot of things that are not happening, but they are claimed to be happening, and people who read this mainstream media actually believe it very ardently in all this situation. And when it comes to some analysis after that, they just don't understand how come they really arrive to this conclusion. Because you need to arrive to the conclusion to certain basic facts. So if you take the situation in Donbass, and if you see how Ukrainian government is providing for the citizens that live there, you will see that there is absolutely no help from them. They can't receive pensions, because for them to receive Ukrainian pensions, they need to cross the border. And Ukraine. Can you imagine how many problems do they have? We, together with Maria, we have relatives there in this region who come very often to Moscow to visit us. And they are telling us how people live there. So we don't learn about it through media, through some sources. We know it from people who we know. They tell us that they can't survive. If it were not for Russia, they wouldn't survive. That's why we have to bring these people elementary goods, elementary humanitarian aid. Every time we deliver this convoy, Ukrainian guards have any right to control what is there in these humanitarian trucks. The OSCE mission monitors, and they do not show any abnormalities. The Ukrainians say we don't want to, because we know this is Russian armaments. We don't want to see, and we don't trust anybody. We don't trust any OSCE, we don't trust anybody. So this is like this, but these people have to survive. A lot of them are refugees in many parts of the world. In Ukraine it's about 1.5 million. In Russia it's about 3.5 million of them working and waiting for better time to come. So somebody has to take care of these people, and it's our obligation. We welcome everybody to come to these regions, to speak to these republics, but people just don't want to come and to see with their own eyes. They want to believe in mainstream media, and that's an easier situation. It's a safer position for them not to notice a lot of things that are happening. So I advise all of you really to read different sources of information. You need to judge by yourself, and not because somebody wants you to believe that it is so or so.
I think we're going to have only one more question, if possible, due to our
So
time.
the time is up already. Oh, so fast.
It's not a question, it's an explanation about what you say. I live this problem in my country, Chile, not talking about agenda and Pinochet. The news say Russia is in Chile. I never saw any Russian soldier, but I saw a lot of United soldiers. But the news say different.
Well,
We cannot trust in any.
thank you very much. And maybe 15, 20 years from now, somebody from Venezuela will say the same things. But the fact is, again, we're living in post-truth world. You just don't believe in the picture that is presented to you. I myself, I don't believe a lot of things. I don't believe 100% to Russia Today. I don't believe 100% to CNN. I try to speak to people, but pick up information from different sources. That's how you can analyze it and ask yourself a question, whether it matches or not with reality. So there are a lot of things that are not logical in this narrative. So, one more?
I guess, Mr. Ambassador, you want to ask a question?
Okay.
Excellency, you know, in this polarized world now, we are not paying attention to a very important issue, which is now on the agenda of the United Nations, 2030 development agenda. And what you could say about the sustainable development goals and what are the priorities for Russia here? Because we need to fight.
Yeah, okay, I'll try to be very short because this is a big question. We don't have priorities because we think that all these goals are equally important. That was our basic position. It would be, cherry picking here would be a big mistake because this is kind of a package solution for all of the world. And if we prioritize some aims, some goals at the expense of the others, that will not be a real assistance to these countries. Also, again, as we discussed, that you can't feed somebody against his will. Otherwise, it would be kind of torture. So we don't think that these goals should be imposed on anybody. Countries are different, situations are different. In general, we are very supportive. We all together try to make a breakthrough to eradicate poverty, to create sustainable development. So these sustainable development goals are, of course, worth supporting, and Russia supports them wholeheartedly. But we are against cherry picking, we're against imposing this agenda, we're against somebody lecturing the others what they should do and should not do. That's what we try to avoid at this stage of negotiations of these goals, and that's what we try to do now. Now there is a trend, unfortunately, when some countries which like to lecture, they also put themselves in the position of a lecturer and trying to show the others what they should do and how they should do, and criticizing and imposing sanctions. So United Sanctions of America are very active in this regard. So, okay, I thank everybody. If I was sure that we have more time. I tried to be very cooperative and answer any questions. I can understand that there are many more of them. I encourage all of you maybe to follow my Twitter, which is at DPOL as Dmitry Polyanskiy _UN. So you will find a lot of information there. You can contact me directly. I am on Facebook, whatever, in any social network. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. If you ask good questions, you will receive good answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It's been a great honor, and I think that we are going to leave this presentation today with a couple thoughts. And one of them, as the Ambassador has encouraged it to do to all of us, is to make sure that we look at different sources of media. And it's true, it's interesting. We were just coming down, and we were talking about Brexit, and I started this presentation by saying, well, this morning when I was reading the BBC. So, I mean, if you really want to have all lenses, you need to get it from all sources. So this is a lesson that we have learned today. Believe me, when the United Nations was established back in 1945, it was done for some geopolitical reasons, primarily on limitations and boundaries. Today, there's a completely different format and different scenario of the United Nations. We're fighting in more ideological stages than actually boundary stages. And that's something that we need to continue to keep in mind. And you folks are here to get educated, to see and explore all possibilities from all different angles, from all different lenses. And we're honored, Mr. Ambassador, to have your opinion, to get your lens, for us to be educated, to open our minds, and to start exploring, to come up with a personal identity. With that said, at this point, you have taught us well, you have educated us, and with that said, we would like to present to you an award, or actually a crystal ball, so you can tell us what's going to happen in the future. And on behalf of Utah Valley University, and you can do it, we present to you a recognition, a memento, as a guest instructor, guest professor at Utah Valley University, with a certificate signed also by the Senior Academy Vice President, Dr. Jeffrey Olson. So thank you very much for joining us at Utah Valley University. This will be a wonderful experience for us to remember, and I hope that as you leave our campus, as long as when you leave actually your wonderful estate, that you can go back home to New York and say, I had the greatest time in the great state of Utah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure for me. And I really encourage all of you to follow politics, again, to study different sources of information, to believe nothing and to make your own conclusions. And please do follow Brexit. This is a very exciting situation when the English people can, for the first time in history, see the end of May before the end of April.
That was a very good one. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.